idem kod da, htjela sam da promenim $300 ne stonu nešto.
I think they're probably up there.
Or they just deo stoji jedan američki tamo i jedan strani.
Oh, they're probably up. They usually
To sam dobila tamo.
Oh, we're fine.
Doćemo sad da vidim, ja mislim da bolje da uzmem tamo.
Je sigurno. The red ones and the...
I onda idemo tu do Slovenstva.
Ali znam da mi je sigurno mlađi.
Ja imam na američkom išle, oni što je grečki. Što je mislio, što je za posljednji mjesec, ali koji smo
Sam vidjeli, kako se ona Vesna 6. Miroslav Ramović.
Treba ti dobiti biva, svaki. Rekla sam već sam rekla, ti moj prijatelj, jesu čuli za film Posljednji slovenski futbolski klub? Napravim dokazani film, ja sam sad vreli i imam da pokažem. Ta moj prijatelj je Holandija živi. To je bio napravljen za 2 godine, ali producent je nesposoban. Ja sam se naručila za fizički film, ja sam se naručila i mi je došli na kranicom na Njimskim zelađe, to naručila za mene. To već ovdje ima 100.000 ljudi koji bi to volili da gledaju s bivšim receptima, tamo vamo. I sad mi treba da je bilo u vezim novinama. Ne znam je li Čučić.
Čučić je došla mjesto Dragana. Dragana ona druga. Ne, što je...
Da, Dragan što je bila za kulturu.
Da je ona je otišla.
Ona je otišla. Jelena Cukić je to.
I to mi je možda se od Dubrovka, možda sam zbog Dubrovka prezima što to opisnica. Da, to je mislim. A kako ste vi
Ja sam radila. Ja moram reći u Beogradu, imamo u Mirhenu.
To ne radi na film. Pa da vidite film, kada to unesi.
Neću, ja ne volim futbol, ja sam.
Čovjek rastavlja druge. Za film, palhetki.
Ne, ja moram da vidim koje su odliču zato što on ja sam
Good afternoon. Hearty welcome to all of you to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the official and living memorial to our 28th president. I'm Mike Van Dusen, the deputy director of the center, and I'm filling in today for two of my colleagues. Marty Slettinger, the director of East European Studies program, is not here. He's in Belgrade completing a few meetings before returning to the United States later in the week. And Dr. John Koumoulides, senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, was meant to be here today. He was prevented from traveling from Indiana because of health problems. Both Marty and John regret very much they could not be here today. It is a distinct honor for this center to have with us Dr. Helen Evans for a program sponsored by the Jaharis Family Foundation. Dr. Evans is a curator for early Christian and Byzantine art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. She's had a long and distinguished career in the art world, capped perhaps by the 1997 Glory of Byzantine exhibit and the 2004 Byzantine Faith and Power exhibit. Dr. Evans is a graduate of Newcomb College, which is, I guess, part of Tulane University, and she received her doctorate from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. The Woodrow Wilson Center is a public-private institution receiving some government funding but raising more than half of its resources from non-appropriated and private sources. Our mission, as most of you know, is to bring together the thinkers and the doers, the scholars and the policymakers, academics and business practitioners, in the confident hope that from their dialogue on public policy issues, each will learn from the other. The work of both will be enriched, and better understanding, better policy can emerge. As the only president we've had who had a doctorate, Woodrow Wilson spoke eloquently to the challenges and the mutual benefits of bringing these two worlds together. Through more than 600 meetings a year in the presence of about 150 scholars during the course of the year, the Center's work and scholarship commemorates the ideals and concerns of Woodrow Wilson. The Wilson Center is a nonpartisan center for advanced studies, a neutral and civil forum for free, open, serious, and informed dialogue. Our aim is to inform the public dialogue with a broad hospitality to many different views. We believe in the magic of dialogue, and we believe that dialogue is at the heart of our representative democracy. Our subject today is very much in the Wilsonian tradition. Helen Evans will speak about art as the key to cultural identity in Southeast Europe. Helen, the floor is yours, and welcome to the Center.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting an art historian to speak, if only in a general way, about the importance of art as a key to cultural identity. Art is experienced by all of us in many ways. At the most basic level, art is that with which we enjoy living. At the most sophisticated level, art can be understood as providing a visual voice for the identity of a people or a religion. Through tracing the origins of motifs in architecture, paintings, even clothing, one can understand the sources which inspired the peoples of our religion for which a work was made, and the constructs that surrounded its production. Among the responses to external stimuli can be admiration on the part of the producer and or the imposition of authority by a more powerful external force, or both. In looking at the monuments of Southeast Europe, I would argue that the arts of the region are the key to the cultural identities of its peoples, as the arts are the visual voices of those living there. This talk will not attempt to cover all the peoples who reside in Southeast Europe, nor will it trace all the complex history of even one of the great traditions that represent the peoples of the region. Rather, I want to focus today on the Byzantine culture which I study, and to consider its role in shaping the cultural identity of a significant portion of Southeast Europe. My work on the role of artistic transmission between cultures and the visual voices that emerge from the process has resulted in two major exhibitions at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. The first, The Glory of Byzantium, Art and Culture of the Middle Byzantine Era, AD 843 through 1261, which was held in 1997, deliberately divided the Byzantine world to encourage recognition of the differing peoples, including those of Southeast Europe, who were in contact with Byzantium and whose art reflected an often ambivalent relation to its political and religious structure. My subsequent exhibition in 2004, Byzantium, Faith and Power, 1261 through 1557, extended the survey of the arts of the Byzantine sphere through the last centuries of the Christian Byzantine Empire rule from Constantinople and into the era of Ottoman rule from the same city, a period also of great significance for Southeast Europe. Constantinople, it is in fact New Rome, Constantinople, now Istanbul, Turkey, that the study of Byzantine links to the arts of Southeast Europe must begin. And today we call the empire ruled from the city Byzantium, an accurate reflection of the deep debt its peoples owed to the Greek tradition and to the Greek town of Byzantium, which the Roman Emperor Constantine I selected to be a new Roman capital in the early 4th century. In fact, however, the citizens of the new capital of the Roman Empire called themselves Romans throughout their history. Even today, the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church who resides in Istanbul bears the title Archbishop of Constantinople, New Rome. And so let's see if I'm going to do this right. Here on the right, you see the plan of the city with its major streets leading to the imperial center in this area. The great walls erected in the 5th century are here and along here. They protected the city from the land and still stand today. And within the walls, the new rulers of the Roman imperial city built magnificent monuments to represent its power and authority. The most famous of these is the 6th century church of Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom. Its mountain-like bulk rises today, as on the lower left, with its vast domed interior, continuing to represent one of the engineering marvels of the world. Its monumental form, located near the tip of the city, this area, and highly visible from the sea, awed the many peoples who came to Constantinople from around the world to study, to trade, and to set siege, as Constantinople controlled the great trade routes between the East and West. The great church was the seat of the head of the Christian Church of Constantinople, and there the emperors, like its builders, Justinian, shown here in his imperial robe, appeared for public worship and in later centuries to be crowned. It is the authority of the church and state in Constantinople, not Rome, that provided the models for the imperial dress and religious liturgy of most of Southeast Europe, and thus marked the ties of much of the region to the Roman Empire of the East, not the states of the West. During the first centuries of imperial rule from Constantinople, there were extensive contact with the peoples of Southeast Europe from Greece to, where's the Danube here? So all of this area is in a regular contact with the center. And in the 6th century, when the great church of Hagia Sophia was built, these 3 nesting containers, typical of works that could have been found in Constantinople, were used near Varna, a town on the Black Sea, to house Christian relics. The outermost marble box imitates a sarcophagus type widely used for burials throughout the empire. The silver inner box at the bottom also replicates a similar coffin, while the innermost box of gold and jewels to the far right, with its elaborate Greek key pattern, reflects the continuing influence of classical culture in the region. Greece, from the founding of Constantinople, would always be tied to the city religiously and for the most part politically. Studies of Byzantine art today often use Greek monuments as exemplars for the lost Orthodox churches of Constantinople. For example, the early 11th century church of Hosius Lukos near Daphne in Greece may have been built in part with imperial money sent from Constantinople. Its exterior articulation and rich interior decoration of marble revetments and elaborate mosaics that you see in these 3 images are closely tied to works that survive today in a more fragmented state in the imperial capital. To the north, the more lasting impact of Constantinople on the regions extending each side of the Danube began in the 9th century. The spread of Constantinopolitan Christianity, throughout the region was largely initiated through the efforts of two men sent there by the Byzantine Emperor Michael III. Constantine the philosopher, or Cyril, and his brother Methodius were from Thessaloniki and were fluent in Greek and a Slavic dialect. While the Christian church was not divided during their era, and I think it's important to remember that at this point in time in the 9th century, you still have a united Christian church, Cyril would develop the Gogolithic alphabet based on Greek, not Latin letters, and this would be used for the translation of religious texts into what would be called Old Church Slavonic. A Greek manuscript, not a Latin one, as here, as here on the right, would have been the source for the translation of the text into Gogolithic. And in the process, images would be borrowed from Orthodox tradition, and the liturgy of Constantinople, not that of Rome, would be the dominant tradition that appears in the region, even as Latin missionaries were very actively engaged in much of this area and were seeking to be successful in converting much of the territory to the Church of Rome. Seems subtly. Other works from Constantinople also helped carry the images of the capital to the northwest. The exquisite 10th century ivory on the left is an icon for personal devotion. It depicts an image of the Koimesis, Dormition of the Virgin, that was developed in Byzantium. As the Virgin lies on her bier at Ephesus in modern Turkey, with the apostles grouped around her, Christ descends from heaven to bring her soul, the baby-like image in his arms, to the welcoming arms of the angels in heaven. Few ivories have survived the climate of the north, but the 10th century fragment on the right shows that the same scene was transported in the same luxury medium to Bulgaria. Only a few of the grieving apostles survived from the original ivory, but from other works we know that the Koimesis became a popular image in Bulgaria. I'm sorry, I seem to have completely screwed up what I brought you all. I'm just getting good at this. I'm going to go through it quickly. This was the one thing. You're going to see me back and forthing. I'm sorry. I'm not quite sure what I did. Similarly, other images that were developed in Constantinople became very popular in Southeast Europe with the spread of Orthodoxy. Among the most famous was the Virgin Hodegetria, she who shows the way, seen on an icon from Kastoria in Greece on the left. This depiction of the Mother of God, who by pointing to her Son shows the way to salvation, was Constantinople's greatest miracle-working image and was preserved in the city's influential Hodejan monastery. According to tradition, the Virgin was the protectress of the great city and the icon one of the most important symbols of that role. On the right is the Mandylion, the image of, quote, Christ not made by human hands, that was brought to Constantinople from Edessa, its historic home, in 944. It would become one of the most popular images that spread from the city to Southeast Europe and Russia. And this work, one of the earliest depictions of the Mandylion to survive, even has a Slavic inscription. And now we'll go hunting. I am really sorry. Changes in the Orthodox liturgy of Constantinople reached quickly into Southeast Europe, emphasizing the region's continuing close contacts with the imperial city. By the 14th century, a new monumental liturgical textile developed there, the Epitaphios, which is used in the Holy Week services preceding Easter, and thus is appropriate to the date of this talk. The work, which was displayed in Orthodox churches on Good Friday and Holy Saturday, and carried in a procession commemorating the death of Christ, displays the dead Christ on his bier. One route for the dispersal of such images beyond the imperial center was through royal, often diplomatic gifts. And on the left is the Epitaphios, whose inscription states in Greek, Shepherd of the Bulgarians, remember during the sacrifice the ruler Andronicus II Paleologus, thus identifying the work as a gift of the late 13th century Byzantine emperor. Housed now in Sofia, Bulgaria, it is both a national treasure of its people and a masterpiece of Constantinopolitan art. As Southeastern European royalty sought to rival or supplant the increasingly weak rulers of Constantinople in the later Middle Ages, they too offered gifts to religious establishments typical of those sponsored by Constantinople. The name of Stefan Uros II, Milutin, an ambitious late 13th century Serbian ruler who was a son-in-law of the Byzantine Emperor Andronicus II, is inscribed on the grand epitaphios on the right. While the gift reflects an awareness of the liturgical and theological advances in Constantinople, its relatively unusual imagery of Christ is also evidence of Serbia's ambition to create works that made evident its desire to be an independent political and cultural power. There we get to it. The relationship of the more northern regions of Southeast Europe to Constantinople was often ambivalent. While from the 9th century on, the rulers of much of the region chose to be baptized as Orthodox Christians, they also frequently sought political independence from Byzantium. In contrast, the empire sought vigorously to extend its influence into the region not only by the conversion of the citizenry, but also, when necessary, by war. During the early Middle Ages, the Byzantine Empire was often successful in its military endeavors. On the left, the Byzantine Emperor John I Tzimiskes is shown in a victory procession into Constantinople in 971, riding on his white horse as he follows the Preslav icon, one of the most sacred images of the Bulgarians, and a trophy of his successful wars there. On the right, the early 11th century Byzantine Emperor Basil II is depicted in military armor, being crowned by angels as busts of his protective saints are shown to the sides. Among the conquered, kneeling at the feet of the warrior emperor, are the Bulgarians. His success and brutality in conquering their forces was such that he became known as Basil the Bulgar Slayer. With the occupation of Constantinople from 1204 through 1261 by the Latin armies of the Fourth Crusade, I'll stop for a second and let you all recover from my dancing slides. I'm new to PowerPoint, so each time I make a new and excitingly different mistake. I'm not quite sure how I achieved this one. With the occupation of Constantinople from 1204 to 1261 by the Latin armies of the Fourth Crusade, the rulers of southeastern Europe gained increasing power and authority. Throughout the region, they would choose to claim the Byzantine title of Basileus, emperor, for themselves, and to have themselves portrayed in the dress and poses of the Byzantine royal court. The mid-14th century Bulgarian Tsar Ivan Alexander and his family stand on the left in Byzantine imperial dress, with the hand of God reaching from the heavens to bless them in much the same way that the Byzantine ruler Manuel II, Paleologus, and his family appear to the right, being blessed by an image of the Mother of God and the Christ child. And in both manuscripts, it's useful to note that the crown prince and this figure are wearing dress that is decorated with the double-headed eagle, which is the symbol of the Paleologan dynasty of Constantinople and which is now being imitated beyond its borders. In Serbia, the double-headed eagle would also be widely adopted as a symbol of the increasing power of its royal family and of their ambition to conquer and replace the ruling dynasty of Byzantium. On the lower right, the elaborately worked ring of the early 14th century Serbian queen Theodora already displays the double-headed eagle on its face. The cup at the upper left, with the double-headed eagle at its center, was probably a gift to the most powerful Serbian ruler, Stefan Uros I Dušan, to one of his retainers. In 1345, Stefan, who lived in Constantinople as a youth, would have himself styled Basileus and Tsar of the Romanoi, the Romans, and Slavs. In both the Byzantine and Greek Slavic fashion, he chose to do this as he extended his empire to include much of Southeast Europe. At the same time that the independence movements of the states of Southeast Europe developed in the regions to the north of Greece, local saints were giving increasing importance. Painted in dress that was long popular in Byzantium, these saints were meant to encourage regional loyalty. On the left is the 10th century Saint John of Rila, who became an important local saint in Bulgaria as the protector of the Second Bulgarian Empire that ruled from 1193 to 1393. On the right are the late 12th century Serbian royal saints Sava and Simeon. Saint Simeon, as Stefan Nemanja, founded the ruling dynasty of Serbia, the Nemanjids, and then retired as a monk to the Hilandar monastery, which he reestablished on Mount Athos. Saint Sava, his son, who died in 1235, established the first autocephalous Serbian church and was its first archbishop. This late 16th century icon is argued to have been painted as a political statement after the fall of the state to the Ottoman Empire. Through its depiction of the two most famous national saints, Serbs were meant to yearn for the return of their lost independent Serbian nation and its independent Orthodox Church. By the end of the Byzantine Empire, the most powerful center for Orthodox spirituality in Southeast Europe was Mount Athos, where many different cultures of the Byzantine state had monasteries, including Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Russia, and Georgia. It was their connections to the Holy Mountain that provided images for the use of the Orthodox peoples of Southeast Europe after their fall and that of Constantinople to the Ottomans in the 14th and 15th centuries. From the far north of Southeast Europe, the ruler of Moldavia in Romania, a non-Slavic state, would send this great banner to the monastery of Zografu on Mount Athos around 1500. On the banner, with its inscription identifying the donor as Stephen the Great, the victorious Byzantine emperor crowned by angels seen earlier has been transformed into a victorious Saint George, who sits enthroned with the multi-headed dragon he has killed as his footstool. The churches Stephan and his immediate dynasty would build in Moldavia are famous for their external painted decorations. In the detail of the pointed Gothic window frame at the painted church of Humar on the upper left here, you can see that the Romanians, like the cultures of all Southeast Europe, were frequently in contact with the Catholic West and with its artistic traditions and styles. The painted decoration of the church, however, shows that the greater loyalty of the region was to the Orthodox Church of Constantinople, a city already transformed into the capital of the Muslim Ottoman Empire 50 years earlier. The two scenes shown here are part of the extensive depictions on the walls of the painted churches of the events in one of the great hymns of the Orthodox Church, the 7th century Akathisos hymn dedicated to the Mother of God, the Virgin. At the center of the upper image, all who come to praise her crowd around the Virgin, who is attended by two archangels in Byzantine imperial dress. Below, in an image of the church from the church at Moldavista, Constantinople is dedicated under siege, with the great waves showing that the Virgin is providing it with protection. This is a blow up this one of that one. According to tradition, in 626, when the Avars attacked, her mantle, which was one of the great talismans of the city, was dipped into the sea, causing a great storm that destroyed the Avars and saved Constantinople. Within the city walls appear icons of the Virgin Hodegetria, there, and nearby of the Mandilion, the face of Christ not made by human hands, which again emphasized the importance of Orthodoxy and its icon tradition in the region. And in the foreground are the emperor here and the ranking clergy of the Orthodox world. In conclusion, for the many people I have discussed today, I would argue that their visual voice, as shown by the images we have seen, was predominantly a response to the images and ideas of the imperial state rule from Constantinople. The Rome that provided their faith and their images of political authority was that of the East, as seen here in a post-conquest evocation of its great past, not that of Rome in Italy and its church. From Greece, with its long tradition of loyalty to Constantinople, to Romania, whose connections were strongest at the end of the empire's history, it was Constantinople, New Rome, that set the standard for their visual voices and that would inspire them to emulate and often at the same time to surpass or supplant the traditions of Constantinople, and that I think is very relevant to the continuing memory, both in the monuments and in the historical sense of the past of these people today. So I do appreciate your inviting an art historian to come into an area of your own great expertise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. The floor is open for questions. Give everybody a, yeah. Marta.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the face of Christ from Odessa that you had in one of your slides there. You just passed it. You said that was from the 9th century, and the inscription is in Church Slavonic? The original, according to legend, is actually from the time of Christ. Right, but
this was moved to Constantinople in 944, and this is one of the earliest surviving copies, and it's probably 13th century. The original image, the mandilion, the towel upon which Christ wiped his face as he was being led to the crucifixion, has been lost at least since the 13th century. One argument is that it was part of the objects that Louis IX bought when he bought the relics from the imperial palace in Constantinople and built the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris to house them. But if that's true, it was then lost in the French Revolution. So the word lost is the operative part of it.
But you said the bottom is in Cyrillic, and I thought you had mentioned Odessa. I may have misheard you.
It's two things. The original image, which is lost, was brought from Odessa in 944 in a great procession and made one of the major talismans of Constantinople by Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus. And that one is lost, and this is the best we know of.
How did it get to Odessa, I guess is my question.
It got to Odessa because the original legend, our tradition, is that the king of Odessa in the lifetime of Christ was ill, and hearing of this great miracle worker in Jerusalem, he sends a retainer to go and ask Christ to come and cure him. And Christ is being led to the cross at Calvary as the retainer arrives, and rather than being able to go to Odessa, takes a towel and wipes his face with it and hands it to the retainer, which has an image of Christ left on it. And if you look, see, these are the little strings at the end of the towel, and that towel is then carried by the retainer to Odessa, where it remains because it cures the ruler and becomes a great protector of the city. And then carrying it on further, mandilion is Arabic for towel, so it becomes important within the Islamic Christian world, and the whole image is taken into the West and becomes the Veronica's veil.
Thank you.
At which point you get a woman involved that doesn't fit in the original story.
Melissa.
Thank you for, right here, sorry. Thank you for a really interesting talk. I realize this is, condensed from obviously years and years of working on this. And you said two things in your introduction that I'd like to maybe have you pick up, talk more about. And number one are the producers of these particular objects that as you used the term kind of the visual voices, and in terms of the individuals, the craftspeople who are producing these, where if you know of where do they learn their crafts, how are the types of ideas behind this material culture, where do those come from? That's the first question. And the second question is just simply in terms of the reception of the people who are obviously viewing these objects, which is always, again, one of the most difficult things to get at in the past. And I was wondering, just in terms of the reception, is how often do people encounter these types of objects in an everyday world? I mean, obviously, you have various, you have peasants, you have smaller, you have small town, you have people from small towns, and then of course you have the great, again, cultural and political centers of the Byzantine Empire.
Helen, there's a lot behind that question, and maybe Melissa would just tell you what she's writing a book on here this year.
Now, we can talk afterwards.
I'll be happy to talk afterward. But yes, the trouble with in writing this talk was I was trying to avoid giving you an art historical lecture in which you would look at me and say, "Who cares?" And at the same time, I wasn't quite sure how much you would bring to it. The producers would range. Certainly those pieces that are most specifically Christological, the ideas would come in some way in connection with the liturgy and the academic scholarship. It's at this point in time being more generally thought that many of these ideas very seriously begin in Constantinople in both secular and religious forms and go out to other areas both through people coming to study in Constantinople, because I think it's always important to realize that it has a great tradition of education, and that both in a secular sense and in a religious sense, people came from all over the more sophisticated world to study in Constantinople, where they could acquire goods. Whether the painter of the icon from Castoria on the left was a monk or a trained craftsman would be, in my guess, a matter of something we really can't define. Monasteries frequently had painters, but we don't know that all painters in monasteries were monks, and people often had these images in their own home and in their local churches. In terms of who would have access to them, the ivory icon belonged to a very rich person. But the Virgin Hodegetria you find on things that are the world's least expensive and most expensive. The image and its ideas would have been available to all levels of society and would have influenced it. It is so much the prime image of the 13th century that it's one of the most important images that goes into the Catholic tradition of Europe, because one of my great issues has always been, why does the Catholic Church, when it smashes the Orthodox Church in 1204, then pick up so many images from the religion that it is just essentially told is a heretical body that should be ignored? Why would you then borrow from the heretics? And part of the idea for an image like that is it becomes attributed to the hand of St. Luke, and therefore a piece with such history that, like the Mandylion from Edessa, it goes back to the lifetime of Christ himself. What's interesting about the Mandylion is that in the Southeast Europe and Russia, it becomes a battle standard, where it becomes a curing image in Western Europe. So the reception of all of these images in terms of theology is for every level, and the painted churches, everybody in the village would see them because they're on the outside of the churches. Whether they were allowed inside the church is unclear. They clearly spent a great deal of time looking at images on the outside. For producers, I'm very committed to the idea that everything good was not done in Constantinople, that there were skilled people that went out into other areas, that Serbia under Stefan IV would definitely have attracted craftspeople that would allow him to emulate in his buildings and in his objects things that would suggest that he was, as he saw himself, as powerful and important as the Emperor of Byzantium. He would certainly have attracted people from all over. I'm not always certain that all these people were Orthodox or non-Orthodox. Yes?
Hi, Renata Hermati, Kennan Institute. I found particularly interesting when you were talking about Saints Cyril, Methodius, and Sava. And my question goes very directly to, what was the role of relics of saints within these pieces of artwork, both religiously, secularly, and for that matter, financially?
Both the church run from Constantinople and the church run from Rome have a great respect for relics. And relics are sufficiently important that Mehmet the Conqueror, when he is establishing his control over his Christian community in the 1450s, will use Christian relics he has in Constantinople as diplomatic gifts. So relics, actual ways to touch the holy, are incredibly important, East and West. What changes is that in the East, after the restoration of icons in 843, the portrait, the image of the holy is also an equally valid way to reach beyond the image of St. John of Rila and to experience the authenticity of their faith through contemplating them. And that's a level of respect for the icon, which means image, that the Church of Rome does not articulate in the same way, which doesn't mean that a Catholic doesn't have a moving experience looking at an image, and it doesn't mean that every Orthodox sees these as a transcendental experience and doesn't, in many cases, localize the holiness. And when the holiness is localized, when this image of St. John, when this banner of St. George, when you think that this banner of St. George worked a miracle, then maybe I follow you to that site. And this happens in both East and West, and pray at it. And then you'd get a whole pilgrimage, and when you get pilgrimage, you get markets, and when you get markets, you get economic benefits, and you get the people of Bari in Italy stealing St. Nicholas from Myra in modern Turkey, so that Bari will become one of the great commercial centers of Italy in the 11th century. So, and Thessaloniki in the north of Greece is always not only profoundly devoted to the protection offered by St. Demetrius, but to the success of the market that is associated with his holy day. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Could you just talk more about how Byzantium might have, and the influences that it had in the northern region below the Danube, might have had on Catholicism in those countries too? Like, are there imprints in Dubrovnik, for instance, or Venice that might have been translated?
I skipped Dubrovnik. First of all, when Christianity is producing the small relic containers, because those nesting things held bones. And actually, when it was found, it may actually have had something that was thought to be part of the true cross. It was still a unified entity, even if the two ends of it spoke two different languages, that the great sees of Alexandria, Antioch, Constantinople, and Jerusalem spoke Greek, and Rome spoke Latin. The western edge of Southeast Europe will be more effectively converted with a more lasting impact or a more renewable impact from Rome. And by the 13th century, when I'm very interested in that area, the Franciscans are there. The manuscripts from there, I actually had it in one draft of the paper, are in a script that's particularly related to the Benedictines of Monte Cassino, and show that it's a close tie to the West, and then they become very much within the orbit of Venice and the expansion of the Venetian Empire. When you go back to the first Christian centuries, when the expansion of Christianity toward the West, one of the really interesting cities to me is Thessaloniki, because it's legally under Rome. And it's probably the fact that it's legally under Rome that allowed the Latin missionaries that were not happy when they saw Constantine the philosopher and his brother to demand that Constantine go to Rome to explain what he was doing, so that his tomb is in the Church of San Clemente in Rome. He died in Rome and died as an honored figure in Rome. He never saw himself as a representative of a specifically Orthodox church. When I talk about it, when I'm teaching, I think of it as the difference in expanding a Catholic church, or Lutheran for that matter, from the Archdiocese of Boston as opposed to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, so that your loyalties would go to that archdiocese, but you're not yet at the point where you have two separate entities. But the other place, to finish, is Hungary, which comes in and brings Catholicism to the south, and is certainly a very powerful aspect of why Moldavia and Stephen the Great turned so strongly to Constantinople to set themselves off from their historic ties to the expansion of Hungary toward the Black Sea, or at least as I understand it.
Thank you. Rick Asplin, Madison, Wisconsin. I realize this goes beyond the focus and time period of your talk today, but I'd be curious as to whether your work would allow you to comment on the role of Ottoman art forms in the identity and politics of the Muslim populations of Southeast Europe.
This is not something that I'm going to tell you that I'm one of the world's great experts on at all. Yesterday, my students and I were discussing, and of course I'm teaching on Byzantium at the Institute of Fine Arts, is the connection between Islam and Byzantium. Islamic monuments speak for the expansion of the people who respond to that culture in the same way that Christian monuments do, and maybe one of the more important aspects of it is that there is a specifically Ottoman mosque form, and that Ottoman mosque is to a great extent a response to Hagia Sophia. When Mehmet the Conqueror takes the city, he has the burial church of the Holy Apostles, which was the Church of Constantine, torn down, and the Fatih Mosque is built on the site, and the Fatih Mosque is deliberately meant to evoke Hagia Sophia. The shape then not only goes into the Balkans, into Southeast Europe, it goes into Cairo. You go to Cairo, you look at the mosque that looks like that, and you know the Ottomans ruled Cairo for at least a period of time, and the Saudis have just torn down one of the Ottoman monuments around Mecca and Medina within the last 5 years to get rid of the memory of the Ottoman presence there. So the image of that, I think, has to be read in two levels, and one is a connection to Islam, and secondly, and perhaps as importantly, to Islam as rule from Constantinople. And maybe I should add that for many Orthodox under the Ottomans, the loyalty was to Constantinople, so that even as Hagia Sophia was at the moment of conquest turned into a mosque, it still evoked a response from the Orthodox that when they were asked to make decisions, they did what the Ottomans of Constantinople did, as opposed to Islamic overlords that were more regional.
I don't know what my question is, but I'll start it. This part of the world has been a frontier of conflict between Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholic Church, Islam pushing towards Vienna but not getting there, Slav and non-Slav, and art has been extraordinarily important for as memory, as an anchor, I guess, for people. And I guess the question is, what has been the role of conflict in giving art a very pronounced role and identity?
I think because the region, historically, because in the period I'm talking about, it's not like it's conflict-free. You have the Serb expansion, you have the Bulgarian expansion, you have the Hungarian pushing south. It's in that period, the war is Christian against Christian and community against community, and what Islam adds once it becomes a truly powerful force because the Bulgars are Muslims, is another entity that has taken over the eastern power base and has then taken the same territories, actually, to me, of the Byzantines. It's just they've added a layer of religious difference that is profoundly troubling to the peoples, and each of them, in a way, respond with the most powerful statement of what they are. And I think the most conservative, the most powerful statement for most of us is in our religious monuments. It's like people don't change their names, people don't change their traditions, and perhaps because it's threatened, they hold to their traditions more. I met an Armenian bishop in Jerusalem years ago who said that because they were threatened, he was making every Armenian church in the world look like the 6th century churches of Armenia, so they would never forget who they were. And I think that while that's not directly tied to Southeast Europe, there's some of that same sense that we must maintain ourselves, and that, as with the icon of Sava and Simeon, that's the way in which you can speak of what you want to be, an independent state. The other part of this, which is a really hard thing to discuss, and we were looking at it yesterday, Suleiman the Magnificent's Grand Vizier was a Serbian noble, and he returns his brother to authority and to the establishment of an autocephalous Serbian church, largely to stop the Catholics from nibbling away at the border of the Ottomans, so that we still draw lines of once he is converted, he's not ours. I'm always fascinated that we don't really look at all the women that marry into the Byzantine royal family. I've started creating a more detailed genealogy, because whenever it's useful to us, we say, well, that bride had a huge influence, but when it's not useful, we forget where she came from. I'd like to see whether that's quite as consistent as I think it may be, that you always bring with your dowry some degree of influence. All of these people have, under the Ottomans, a significant part of the Ottoman court. And Guru at Harvard has shown recently that it's actually in the documents that the Ottoman sultans married women from all of the minority communities, so that all of them, as with the Book of Esther, could hope to have an Ottoman sultan who would be of their traditions. So I think everybody grabs what they can identify. What also happens in later centuries is that as Ottoman rule in certain areas gets more emphatic, the churches get smaller. The churches become less overtly Christian from a great distance, and they're not allowed to have bells. So that the restoration of bells becomes a huge issue in the independence movements because of the Ottoman outlawing of bells.
Became too decentralized, and the Ottomans couldn't handle it, so they had to centralize more, and that led to problems for the independent churches.
Well, and the bells make more noise than a human voice, so you get the wooden clapper, and then you get, in today's church, you can go to places where they're actually realizing that they're continuing Ottoman traditions, because by now it's so ancient in their history that they think it's a truly ancient tradition that goes back to the beginning. Because as you read, any of us read back, we sometimes add myths to what something that was imposed upon us made us do, and then ultimately the myth becomes more real than the actual fact.
Any other questions? Yes, Zed.
I wondered, is there any residue of orthodoxy left in Albania? This thought sort of occurred to me because we have had a lot of conflict between there, and there were these Orthodox bishops here recently who came from Kosovo, and I actually meant to ask whether there was any possibility of any bridging between the Albanians and the Serbs. And in this case, I guess I'm asking, is there any evidence in art? It's supposed to be about 20% of the Albanians are supposed to be Eastern Orthodox.
Albania has some really fascinating and important archaeological digs going on for the early centuries. And I have been assured by many people, but none of whom can get me access to pictures, that there are some incredibly important icons in Albania. And I'm happy to repeat that to you, but I am not able to promise you that it's accurate. Albania today is interestingly tied to Macedonia. Macedonian universities are teaching Albanian. I can't quite see why, but for either side. But I don't actually know where the Albanian clerics are being confirmed from. I know that the Ministry of Culture of Greece has been attempting for the last few years to be very helpful with the Albanians in stopping goods that have been coming across the border and returning cultural property to Albania. And one of the people in the ministry told me that they were in fact being asked by the Albanian members of its cultural patrimonies of various forms to hold on to the pieces in Greece because they couldn't guarantee their safety if they were returned. So that they were returning them more slowly than they might, so that when they got back they wouldn't just be stolen again and exported across a different border. But I'm really sorry, I don't know who, I don't know what degree Albania is still under the Patriarchate in Istanbul. I think it is, but I actually am not an expert on that.
Any other questions? I forgot to mention at the start that Helen's extraordinary career began with Japanese art. And with Genghis Khan, she moved west.
I am the only person that thinks Constantinople is in the West and that it is at the other end of the Silk Road. So when I started taking more Byzantine courses and people kept talking about the East, I kept thinking, no, we're talking about the West. I think what's really exciting right now, maybe you all don't see it the same way, is that as the world is kind of moving, Constantinople is returning to being a central. Constantinople, Istanbul, whatever it is, at any different point in time is becoming much more what it was originally, a central point.
Very true. Thank you very much for being with us, Helen.
Having me.
Thank you all for coming.
And if anybody has questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Melissa Bocavor teaches at the University of New Mexico, and she's working on, Serbian memory for a period. I don't know if she'll come up. That's why I asked her to say what she was working on.
I'm going to put them on postcards. I know there's postcards. I figured, wow, this is a way to keep kids
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. This is great.
I worked for John Culver. We worked together on trying to stop the sale of aliens and aircraft to Iran.
Oh, my Lord. Yeah.
No idea where you were, but
Yeah.
not surprising.
Yeah.
Connection with
Well, good to see you. Where you're?
I'm in Madison. I'm writing a book on the development.
Oh, my Lord. Well, you know Marty?
I don't, but I'm staying there.
He'll be here later this week. Just happens to not be here today. Right? Yep.
For actually 2 years. Then I realized I sort of had anything to expect of it. So I spent most of the last year there in conjunction with the last round.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming. I don't know if Melissa
If you email me your issue, this is the day right now.
Casual question. 100 years ago in art history course, they mentioned the trying to get back to the pronounce it correctly for me.
So I probably know better.
And how's that going? Are they still working on the interior?
They'll always work on it. They will never ever take down the scaffolding, because the last time they took down the scaffolding, a fundamentalist in the Turkish parliament immediately demanded that you return to being a mosque. You can argue that Ataturk did not part of it. And that once it is repaired, it will be being a mosque. And then there's a petition going around for X million signatures to make it
Really and truly, I'm interested in the art on the walls that I am in.
The World Monument Fund has been working there for the last 6 years, and before that UNESCO was working. So there is a steady continuing effort. Personally, I work for somebody who water people in both and Ethiopia and Russia. But I suspect that would cost millions of dollars that no one will spend. But they're equally dirty, so it's not like one is being allowed to get dirty.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Picture with a face.
Yes. And you can tell me how you would read it.
Yes, this one.
Yes.
Образ Господень
I can give you a scholar that will put it in Russia. I'll give you a scholar that will put it in Bulgaria. I'll give you a scholar that won't take bets on it. I am not a paleographer.
I can read it. It is written in Russia. Образ Господень у Боруси.
But Oka Bakalova will not agree with you. But it seems to me that it's not illogical, because Russia turns it into the great battle stand. Even in photographs of the beginning of 1917, you have Russian troops marching with the Mandelion, and it is the symbol that, in theory, I'm going to forget the battle in which they first stopped the Mongols.
The Mongols.
No, the
Oh,
Mongols.
Oh.
The 13. What is it? It is first.
I don't know, like 13, 15.
Somewhere
Right,
13, 15, 14.
yeah.
But that's the battle. The banner that is thought to be the banner that led to Dmitry Dyatlov, something like that.
That's a class from many, many years ago.
Yes. and for 4 classes ago for me, so I've forgotten it already again. But I do know that this is a highly debated topic for which I bring no expertise. I'm sorry.
Thank you for coming. Do you want to get a quick bite? Good.
Great, I'm Melissa
Yeah,
Donovan. I'm one of the fellows here.
And you're at the University of New Mexico and writing on Serbian memory.
So my...
Well, I didn't go any further because I don't remember the rest of it.
Right.
They gave me the thing back, which I clearly...
Okay, this isn't yours then.
No, that's your mistake. I'm a flat person. I haven't moved to memory sticks yet, and clearly don't have...
Actually, memory sticks are a lot easier than anything
That's what
else.
people tell
Yeah,
me.
they really...
Obviously, because
I mean, I too have had the feeling that,
I think last night when I was copying it,
Will they send it to her?
I lost, I rattled, and I thought, without even the whole thing, the mouse, and obviously I drugged the picture out of place. I was sitting there thinking, this is going to be a really interesting paragraph if I have no image.
Right.
How did you become involved with
a topic on memory?
You know, I'm a 20th century Yugoslav historian, and I have
No, it's not. Call your dad. Why don't you ask him? I don't think it's not fair. Yep. Love you too. Bye. You think? First food, you're gonna have a shitload of work to do? I don't know. Took a week off. Let's see. Lunch. That. Ow, that hurt. Got myself in a kneecap. Can you kill him? Never mind, I get it. Fix your lunch. Connectors. Off. Off. Sound like my wife now. Talking about doing temp work. Yeah. Same woman that I told you about yesterday that was yelling at me about money. She wants you to make it. anything else down here today, right? Upstairs.